Hello, everybody. Welcome to this Warhammer Online developer discussion. We've gathered a bunch of people who did work at Mythic, and they've willingly agreed to come to do a developer talk with us. So I'm going to introduce everyone. First, we have Josh Drescher.
Hi, Josh Drescher. I was a toilet cleaner at Mythic in 2008. I'm kidding. That was Max's example of a possible job that one of us might have had. I was a producer at Mythic for the Warhammer Online Age of Reckoning project.
Excellent. And now we have Jeremy Dale.
Hello, Jeremy Dale. I was the lead animator for definitely through launch, and then got distracted by some other stuff afterwards, and tried to get some more tech happening and things. That's enough. We can go continue.
And now we have Mark Davies.
Hello, everyone. Mark Davis. I had several titles on Warhammer. I think the last one I had was content director, or yeah, it was content director, but that was same as producer. I was at Mythic for like 10 years, a long time, a lot of titles.
Awesome. Now we have Vincent Hatcher.
Hey, so I started with a few weeks before the launch of Warhammer Online. I was an initial CSR, and I was with the game from launch until finish. And during my time at Mythic, I also did a little bit of moonlighting, working on Dark Age of Camelot and some development for Ultima Online, where I created the origin story for the Gargoyle race. And I was one of the last men standing in the CSR department when the sad day happened and the servers were shut down for Warhammer.
Oh, wow. That's quite cool. We have Alan Davis.
Hey, I'm Alan Davies. I was the server engineer at Mythic, and I started there in 2006 and was there till the end. So.
Oh wow, long haul.
He's also the best carpenter in the company.
That's true.
That's true. I did make a target.
And now we have Mike Stone.
Hey, Mike Stone. I was a producer at the time. I was with Mythic from 2001 to 2009, and on Warhammer I was in charge of the capital cities.
Nice. And we have Keaven Calvert.
Keaven Calvert. I was started off as a CSR with Vinnie, and eventually made my way to game design on Warhammer Online.
Excellent. And then we have Kevin Freeman.
Hi, Kevin Freeman. I was a game designer for Warhammer. I joined Mythic in 2007 and was there until my departure in 2013.
Nice. So, who wants to take the first question?
Josh.
Josh.
You have been volunteered as tribute.
All right. Very exciting.
Right. So we did a bit of stalking, and before working on Warhammer, you were working on Imperator Online, the cancelled futuristic Roman Empire themed MMO game.
Man.
So what was the reason for Mythic putting all its efforts into Warhammer, bringing them off of Imperator, and would you have stayed on that team?
Boy, starting out with a challenging one.
From beginning to end, Josh.
So, Mythic had been around for a number of years before I joined. I joined in late 2001, just before the launch of Dark Age Camelot. Imperator was our follow-up project to Camelot, and I joined that team at the tail end of development. So I can't speak with any authority about all the initial conversations that were had, some of the decisions that were made, but we wanted to do something that was very different from Camelot, so something that was much more focused on kind of a single-player experience. Like, it's still an MMO, but much less PvP, much more PvE, much more sort of collaborative and so forth, much thicker in terms of narrative. So instead of drawing from existing mythology, it was a completely newly created world and so forth. So by the time, let me see if I can find it real quick. Give me 1 sec. Stare at nothing for just a moment.
He's turning the servers back on.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, please.
Oh man.
Coming back. I should have just put things next to myself. So this was the ticket that we made for, I think it was E3
Look at you.
2005. So we and Mark did a lot of late nights with me on the infamous Imperator game trailer that we put together with CJ Greb and a couple other folks that ran in our little booth at E3. And actually, if you have a time machine, there's a map on the back that shows you where you had to go to see it.
Wow.
And so we had this story trailer. Mark probably remembers the star of that trailer was Earl Bowen, best known as the psychotherapist from all the Terminator movies.
Dr. Silverman, yeah.
Yeah, and so Mark and CJ and I had him on a phone call at one point to do a bunch of, he was in a studio, I think in Hawaii or something, and we were like directing him over the phone, and we were having him do voiceover for Imperator and for the Camelot player-controlled mounts release that was coming out. And I don't think we told him we were having him do voiceover for two different games
in two different genres.
So we're like, outer space cannon batteries need to be activated at long last. Rideable horses are coming to Camelot. And so it was clearly a very confusing experience for him.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
But yeah, so it was 2005. Camelot had been out doing gangbusters for about 4 years at that point. We were interested in having something new come to market. Imperator was the first project, but it's hard to argue with a license as big as Warhammer, especially at that point. There really weren't a lot of high quality Warhammer video games around at that point. That has obviously changed a bit in recent years. And so I think it was just a matter of the opportunity was too good to turn down. I think that officially we never canceled Imperator; it was just postponed. Obviously, that
in a turnaround.
It is in turnaround.
It's in turnaround.
It is in turnaround. But I can tell you, like, there's other stuff over there. There was a whole screenplay that was written, for like an Imperator movie and everything else. So like, a lot of thought went into it, but ultimately it just came down to we were a team full of people that had loved Warhammer for years, and we had the opportunity to work with like a dream IP. You make the right call. And I think that ultimately that's what the executives did.
Wow.
Mark can disagree with me. He was there for all of it as well.
That was a very good answer, Josh.
So much so he needs a drink.
Good answer. Good answer.
Oh, and I'm remembering something now. Part of the other reason that we wound up in contact with GW was we had our sort of like Roman Space Marines. And so there was like hey, let's make sure that we're not, getting too close to something that's a little too 40K-ish.
Interesting.
And so we'd been in conversation with it, which is the reason if you can find any of the old screenshots or whatever, like all of our heavily armored Space Marines didn't have helmets on. So they're wearing like giant crazy battle armor with exposed tiny little bobbleheads. And part of it was like the Space Marine helmet is part of what makes you a Space Marine, from a lawyer standpoint. So there was some of that also, I think.
Yeah, I think Paul Barnett had been a friend of Jacobs for a long time. Mark Jacobs, the CEO of Mythic, and this was the door that I think let a lot of those conversations really start happening. Mythic leadership started meeting Games Workshop leadership, and it opened the floodgates for that to happen.
Yeah, because I did find a video of Paul talking about the old Warhammer Online project.
Oh, the
Yeah.
original.
Roll the clip.
It's actually been made private now, so I can't view it. So, and that was only in the last year, so someone's actively turned that off.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Imperator actually wasn't canceled when we started Warhammer.
Right.
It was Warhammer was slowly cooking. Imperator was still going, and we had that E3, and I think that was the moment when we decided, okay, Imperator's not the thing we want to chase. We want to chase Warhammer. And after that E3, and it was like the impressions that we got from the fans, the media wasn't as exciting as we had hoped. And I remember coming in, I was late that day, riding the elevator up, and somebody said to me like, like, what a day, right? And I'm like, yeah, Tuesday. And it was, and I was working on Warhammer, and suddenly we had a ton of devs joining our team.
Oh, geez.
It was a flood of people. And we were still really early. If you remember, Alan, I'm sure you remember this. we were rewriting the whole engine. Like we had taken Dark Age of Camelot and yanked all of the server code out, and we're rewriting it. And by we, I mean not me at all. All the people. And
Just
so, yeah.
Alan alone in a dark room.
Yeah.
Now I remember that day as well. The folks who had been working on Imperator, a bunch of us went over to, I think it might have been Brad Derrick's apartment. We went to somebody's apartment and their wife wasn't home, and we drank all the liquor in the house.
Wow.
And I remember we were watching Chappelle's show, and just like we were drinking our way through it in like reverse order of quality. So we're like, guys, we're down to like a quarter of a bottle of Malibu coconut rum. Is everybody still sad? And the answer is yes. All right, into the rum we go.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I remember being called into a large office. I can't remember what floor it was, but there was basically, I think, the Imperator team. And at first we're all like, I forget what other studio at the time was like mass layoffs and they were locked out and they couldn't go back in. I think we were all like, are we next? Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Oh, that was
who was that?
That was the studio that did oh shoot, I keep wanting to say Variant, but it was the one that was made by the folks who made EverQuest, who were making like the sequel to EverQuest.
Oh, right.
Mike Wyatt was there. It was the studio he had come from.
EverQuest Next or whatever.
It wasn't. I mean, it wasn't literally EverQuest Next. It was the spiritual successor to EverQuest. It was like that return to hardcore MMOs. And I'm blanking on the name.
It was Vanguard.
Vanguard. That's what it was.
That's it.
Yeah.
So yeah, Rob and Mark were kind of just letting the team know everyone's going to be going to Warhammer, and I think at that point it was like almost 2.5, 3 years of Imperator. So it was a sad time, but it was, no one was getting laid off. Everyone was just transitioning to Warhammer. So it was a happy moment, yet sad as well.
Yeah, we had some other weird stuff that happened during that period where like there was the brief Camelot console game that we were kind of kicking around and various other things. Yeah, I was responsible for the daily builds on Imperator, so I was always the last person Mike could talk to every day before he got to go home.
That's right.
Castra Lupus or whatever.
Still remember your corner cube outside of Hickman's office. For late night chats.
And I remember it was that same day. Mark's coming up in the elevator, getting it one way. I had gone into, I think it was Colin Hicks' office. I was like, all right, got to crack the whip on this stuff. Some things are running behind. We need to get moving. He's like, take it easy today. Maybe don't do any of that. I'm like, okay. What a weirdly laid back attitude. It's like, it's because we're never doing another build of this game ever again.
Yeah.
And we had just gotten in the ladders. The ladders had started working.
Wow. Okay. Question two. So this one is aimed at Mark Davies. I'm going to mix that up. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
In the first Warhammer Online production podcast, we were introduced to you, showing us the World Atlas. We found some bits of it buried in the client. The whole world seemed to have drastically changed during development, including Altdorf and the Inevitable City being completely redesigned. Can you tell us more about the world how the world changed during development? But before you start, we do have those pictures to show you. So let me just...
This is your life.
So we have...
Wow.
Oh
my gosh.
So that's looks like some elf zones. We have the Inevitable City.
Beautiful.
Which looks nothing like how it does now.
Wow.
We have the Altdorf Reichland which has all of the 7 wizard colleges of magic. And a river going through it. And that's a zoomed in version of the city. We found part of the elf cities layout, which was pretty cool. The high elves, that is. And that's a close up of it. And then we found a different Dark Elf Tier 4 campaign, which instead of the Black Ark, it goes to Nagarand. Vagabond. I never said that out loud. Which shows us here. And yeah, so tell us more.
Okay, so when we were just talking earlier about all those people from Imperator coming over, right? And when that happened, we had a whole lot of developers who we needed to find work for. And as I mentioned, we were still rewriting the server. We didn't have the ability to do actual content, to create things. And then you add on additionally, we had rules with Games Workshop where we needed to write everything down. Everything had to be approved by them. So, for example, in Dark Age of Camelot, if we wanted to make a quest, somebody would just make a quest, and we'd review it internally, and that's it. But in Warhammer, we had to write that down first. We typed it into a document, and then that had to be reviewed. It's actually one of my jobs, and another guy named Dustin, who was my boss. We spent weeks and months reading all the developers that we had on the team, reading their content before submitting it to Games Workshop for approval. So there was a lot of writing, a lot of design that took place up front. And one of the best things we ever did was that we hired someone who was an artist and a designer. His name was Matthew Doyle. He was fantastic at creating those maps that you saw. I think he did all of those. If not, he did most of them. Someone may have taken it over after he left, but for the most part, the maps you're seeing, he drew, and it was, like any other design, he would do a pass at what we'd have a meeting, we'd talk about ideas that we liked for a particular area, and he would draw those, and then we would back and forth it with the team, and then we would write documents, and maybe they'd change a little bit, and then we would write designs for them, and so what you're seeing, I think, in many of those cases are the aspirational where we started. That's generally what we like to do, I think, in games, is we like to start with a thing that we would love to do. And then over the course of weeks and months of being beaten down by producers and like being told what we can and can't have, eventually it gets scoped down to something that's manageable. And just like every game company everywhere, we don't go back and update our design documents. We just, forget those things. So a lot of those images were from a time when we were probably early on. Capital Cities, for example, we had intended always to do 6. That was the goal. And Mike, I think you were behind. You were in Virginia when I went to Gamescom, and I came back, and you were like, "Guess what?"
Right.
And it was like we had cut the other 4 capital cities, and so
Yep.
And part of the reason why the capital cities changed, like Inevitable City change, I think, was heavily because Altdorf, as we were getting in and making that map and learning what it would take to do that, we just learned so much about the scope of what felt right, how long it took to do a thing, not to mention certain creative people at the very top, who couldn't stop coming up with cool, crazy ideas to keep shoving into Altdorf. We maybe have missed our schedule because of that, and we started running out of time to do more stuff. So yeah, a lot of scope changes and just actually seeing things in game caused us to revise our schedules and our scope and things. Yeah, and those maps were a lot of fun. I can't remember if I ever got to fully finish. The way I did it was I wanted to show everyone. We had a ton of people, right? A ton of people on the project, and we were spread out over I don't know, a pretty large square foot. It wasn't like we were in floor pits for the most of it, like big pits of rooms where everyone could talk to one another. We were spread out mostly in like individual offices, so communication was an issue, and trying to tell people where we were working, what we were up to. And so yeah, out of some crazy brainstorm, I put those things on the wall, and I meant to fill them all in color. When the artist would finish an area, I was supposed to take those down, the black and white ones, replaced with color. I don't know, does anybody remember if I ever actually did the final map in color or not? I'm not sure we ever got that far with that big crazy paper map.
I don't remember, but I was going to remind you that due date is coming up, so you got to get on that.
It's a little overdue, but
for the 20th anniversary, we're going to get that wrapped up.
Yeah.
Oh man.
We'll get that Vampire Counts expansion. We'll.
Oh jeez.
yes.
Right in the stomach.
And one real quick funny story. So I accidentally took credit for my boss's idea because those maps, right? So we're making these maps, and we would brainstorm ideas for them. And he said once, you know, what would be cool would be to have maybe like a train depot in one of these maps. And I was like, oh yeah, it's cool. And so I went to Matthew's office, like my boss, and then I was next guy, and then I would go and talk to Matthew, and we'd write it on the board. And like, don't forget to do a train station somewhere. And we were like, yeah, maybe Blackfire Pass feels right for that. And so months and months go by. We're doing different maps, and we eventually get to that area. And then, you know, Matthew puts that into the document, and then more months go by, and we're creating the maps. And then Brian Clark, unfortunately, who couldn't make it today, he did Blackfire Pass in that train depot. And on the map, it was just a little icon that said like train depot. But Brian took it and just made it freaking amazing. It was this Warhammered version of a train depot. It was like there was carts, train cars knocked over. It was smoking. There was debris everywhere. It was so freaking cool.
So good, so good.
Yeah, right. And I'm standing over Doyle or Brian's desk and looking at it and feeling really proud of the work the team had done.
Right.
And you know, it was cool that my idea had made it into the game. And Destin walks over and says, "Oh, cool! And he was content director at the time, and you know, he rarely did actual like hands-on with the developers, right? He was usually at the studio level or the project level, and he was very excited, like, "Oh, cool! An idea of mine got into the game." And I went, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, that was my idea." And I'm like, "No, it wasn't. It was my idea." And he's like, "Don't you remember?" And then it all came flooding back, and I was like, "Oh, God,
no.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And I had carried it for like 2 years, and I had totally forgotten. That's part of that story. It kind of tells you the where we go from paper to how long it takes to get into the game. So much can happen between paper and actual implementation that things change, and we have to revise our schedules and our whole scope of everything.
Wow, yeah, that is quite crazy. So we've got another question here for Jeremy Dale.
Oh no.
Which says, I read somewhere that dance animations were not added into the game because it didn't fit into the serious nature of the game. Did you start implementing any, or did you have any specific dances in mind for any races?
No, I mean, so I was kind of on board with the where not quite as slammed to the spectrum end of the no dancing in Warhammer, because that was a thing that was very very much a and like basically it was rough too, because like this is weird because I haven't really had this conversation necessarily, but like there was no animation director. It was like me and then Greg Grimsby, and then the art director, and then Paul, obviously, you know, and then whoever else is, you know, had feedback. And so a lot of it turned into there was some tech that I was trying to get in where which was like a combo system for the animations, and then we ended up not doing that, but fortunately we were able to like string those together into like more epic you know, abilities, right? So like it would flow through a few of the things that we had set up, and then we kind of put that into I put an emote in for kata, which was like the name of the system or whatever, so you could swing from here to here to here to here or whatever, and then do stuff. I don't remember if we put that in as like if you hit dance it would do that as well, you would just swing. I don't remember, but like even we made sure that even everybody that wouldn't have had like, even if you weren't a melee character, you had a couple swings that you could do, you know, with a staff as a mage or whatever, I think. But that was, I don't know if that covers. I'm gonna try and keep my answer short. But
if memory serves, Jeremy, and you remember this better than anybody, we had taken a firm no dancing stance with Imperator to the point where, if memory serves, we'd actually made swag, like T-shirts, and on the back it was like, "No dancing required" was like one of the slogans for the game. And I think it was a dig at Star Wars Galaxies. Like, I think that they'd had a really robust sort of like catalog of dance animations. We're like, well, if you think that dancing is ruining your fantastic sci-fi adventure, then come play this game, which will not have dancing in it. And I think that sort of managed to get its way into Warhammer initially, at least. I think that's like some of the DNA of that came from.
We're like that movie where Kevin Bacon was in, where there's no dancing allowed in the town.
Yes, yes, Footloose.
You know what's funny, though?
The Gene Hackman of video games.
Yes.
No dancing in the game. Calvert, I don't know if you remember this, but as a CSR, when you were first created, and occasionally if there was like a patch or if something was slow with the game, as a CSR, you were just this geometric shape, but occasionally the base wireframe of the character that you had chosen would show up. And so when you were flying around, you would be the wireframe of your character, and I had chosen a sorceress. And so there was occasional times where I would be flying through the game sky and the wireframe of my sorceress would reappear and she'd be going like this as she was flying through the sky because she was doing like the running animation. So it was almost like an indirect dance in the game.
Probably the fall animation.
That's fun. Yeah.
Yeah, like a fall, but it's a run at the same time. Like it's trying to combine multiple animations.
Yeah.
There was a lot of that.
That's funny. Stuff like that. A quick thing just since animation, one of the things that was, because like Warhammer is very grimdark, right, is a thing and very serious, and they take it very seriously, or especially at that time there wasn't a lot of goofing around, and so like there was some stuff where we made a very specific choice to not do super flashy things and just try to do powerful things. So like that's why there was no, like, until we got to like the like the witch elf or whatever, there wasn't a lot of like crazy spin kicks, or fancy stuff. What is that? Nice. He brought the sketchbook. But so like with the because like a dwarf isn't going to do a backflip when he hits somebody with an axe, right, or whatever. And so like there were some people that were like, these animations feel really like, because there was like Lineage and other things that were out at that time, and people are doing crazy cool things with like giant stuff. Quick note to like just a props to the effects guys. We worked really closely with them too on a lot of this stuff, and there was a lot of figuring out weapon trails and stuff is really hard, and making that stuff look good, and they did a great job of working with us on that stuff. So
great, fantastic. All right, so now we're over to Vinnie, which is, how much power as a CSR did you have to help people? Like, what could you have done to really upset someone?
Oh, the question is not so much how much could I have done, but how many times did I? It was really interesting because there were so many of us in the beginning. With the launch of Warhammer, I mean, I feel like it was a couple hundred of us that were hired, I feel like. And, it depended on what tier you were, because we did have multiple tiers. There was like your introductory tier 1 CSR, tier 2, and then I think tier 3 or tier 4 was the cap. And so in the beginning, a lot of it was like you were just a stewardess. You were kind of like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'll follow feedback. But as you became more of a veteran, you started to be privy to, okay, well, what happens when you have to action somebody? And we didn't so much have like in other games, you have a jail where you would send somebody if they were in violation. It was more so you had the ability to make yourself visible if you had to. And so we were kind of like ghosts. And I will never forget, there were multiple times where people were using bots, or if they were one of the many a plethora of violations that you could perform. You had commands that you were given based on your permission level on what you could do. And if I remember correctly, one of them was like freezing a character and not allowing them to run away. And there was a moment that I will never forget. It was me and 2 other CSRs, because it was a group of about 10 players, and they were using bots and they were spam farming, macroing, all this stuff. And it was on, I think it was by the ocean somewhere. And we showed up and we decided, how are we going to do this? And so before we made ourselves visible, we were a little bit like, all right, let's make them squirm. So we froze them before we made ourselves visible. And so you had these characters, and we were watching the chat log, and they were like, what's going on? Oh my God, I can't move. I think the game is crashing. And then all of us went visible at the same time. And the people were like, oh, expletive, like, oh God, they caught us. And so at that point, that was where you could choose like, okay, well, this is the severity. You could suspend an account. You could limit what they were able to do. You could actually like, hold them for review. So, you really were held to a very high standard because you weren't supposed to make yourself visible unless absolutely necessary, and it was not in a massive public space. Like if one of us ever went visible in Altdorf, I think Todd would have come over and had a talk with us. But you know, you could suspend accounts, put them on review. You could also interact with their mail. You could restore and delete items. And you know, there were times, depending on the, and this is one thing I loved about the job, was that if they were being really abusive, you were able to make that call of like, what level of restoration or what level of service are we going to provide, you know, because it's a two-way street. You know, if they're going to be super abusive and they're going to be super mean, then you had that discretion to make, okay, well, what does this institution or this instance merit?
What is the minimum possible service that I can provide that still gets them functional again, but is still like, so I can get out of this as quickly as possible.
Yes. Yeah. I remember Calvert and I had many conversations because when he became quest lead, and, you know, we would tons of times people would be like, well, I want this, I want that. And I'd be like, well, what can we do for this quest? And even when we were both CSRs, you know, it was interesting when because you would appear, and then if you were not higher up, you would have one of the higher tiers show up, and watching them do some of the things that they did, it was definitely like there were people that we had to ban and emails that we would have to answer about that. So you had a lot of power, but it was limited by permissions. So thankfully you really couldn't, like if you decided to go crazy, you would get caught.
I mean, we had a system. Oh, sorry.
So I was going to not just the CSRs had those accounts. Pretty much all the developers did. The difference was none of us were properly trained to use them safely. And so I remember I had been dating my now wife for a month or so. And I invited her over to the studio after hours one night to give her a tour of like, this is what we do. And so this was back during the tail end of Imperator development, but Camelot was live. And so I remember walking her around the game, and I'm my little invisible, you know, glowy ball of power. And I take her over to the player housing area because that was much more in her like wheelhouse of interest. And I remember we went into somebody's house, and I could see the player was there, like, but they were facing a wall, so their back was to us. And I'm looking around; it was a really beautifully decorated house, and I'm showing things off, and I don't realize that if I double click on something with my permission level, it'll take it out of their house and put it in my inventory. And so I'm like, oh look, they've got a dragon trophy. They've got a dragon trophy on the wall. So I'm like, oh no, it's not on the wall anymore. And so I panic and I fly straight up in the air at CSR speed. And I don't know why, like I'm invisible, but I was like, if I run away, nothing bad will happen. And then I fly away, and I'm like, almost all of these houses are completely identical from the outside. I realize it's in my inventory, and I'm like, okay, this date is now about me finding this one house.
Oh my
Before
gosh.
that dude turns around and realizes that his dragon trophy is gone. So I'm going like door to door, trying to look for, like, please don't log out, dude, because if you're not there, I won't know which house this is. And we were able to find it. I couldn't remember what wall it was on, so I just put it on a wall and left, and then just sort of like crossed my fingers. I'm like, well, if somebody from the CS team comes and kicks my ass tomorrow, then I know I put it in the wrong house or whatever. But as far as I know, nobody ever found out until today.
The last little anecdote I can tell you, it isn't one of the more powerful things that we have, but we had the ability to check chat logs. And when you were investigating someone, that was one of the things that you had to do. And I don't know how many times I would be helping somebody, and of course, when they're talking to a CSR, they're like, "Oh, thank you so much, CSR Soul Race, you're so great." And I remember there were a few times where I would help someone, and I would be reading their private chat logs, and they'd be like, "Oh, this guy's a freaking idiot. I'm gonna milk him for everything I got." And there was this one time where this guy was like, "This must be some pimply-faced teenager in his mom's house, and blah 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 blah. I'm gonna get all the money in the world." And so when I was helping him, I was like, "I'm so sorry, but unfortunately, I'm unable to restore everything. However, I can give you this one item back. And oh, by the way, I actually have a bachelor's degree, and I do not live with my parents."
Ouch.
There's a lot of fun
Yeah.
stuff you can do as a CSR, but
We won't even go into the role playing.
there were a lot of people who enjoyed that part of it, though. You know, they had a lot of questions, you know, related to role play. Where'd Vinny go?
Yeah, he disappeared.
Here,
went
my
invisible.
USB is being silly.
He just
He
got
answered his
kicked.
question and he's gone.
And he's
I'm role playing a CSR again.
gone invisible.
So,
That was the thing, though. They would
got
they would talk
banned.
to you and they would assume based on your name like what type of character you should be. And so mine was a kind of gruff sounding one, so they always assumed I was a dwarf, and so they would always get into the dwarven role play if they could, and it was a lot of fun. I thought that was a very good part of it. But I was also focused mainly on the quest side of things, and so a lot of times they had very lore specific questions towards the quests and all that.
And were you trained for that?
Yes. So initially I started, I think the first 6 months or so, just as normal CSR, kind of worked my way through the tiers to tier 2, as most of us did within the first few months. And then at some point it kind of, I guess, I was taking a lot of these tickets, or I, was reporting a lot of bugs and all that kind of stuff regarding the quests, public quests and all that kind of stuff. And as that kind of came through, eventually they said, hey, we've got this kind of guru spot that we always have someone doing. And at the time it was Matt Kukovic was the quest lead for us. And it's sort of a very Sith-like thing. There's always a master and an apprentice, and they hadn't had an apprentice for a while, and so they were like, well, you're it now. And so then he trained me for about nine months to a year. He went on to become a designer for Ultima Online, and when he went to do that, they offered me the position, and this was kind of getting to the point where we had been through, I think, 2 layoffs at that point, so we were running a little low on available apprentices. So, but it was really interesting training under Matt, because he had originally kind of started with Dark Age of Camelot, and then he had to write a lot of the kind of guidelines for us. And it was, how far can we go to help someone unbreak a quest when they're having problems with it right now?
Oof. Yeah.
And how much do we bug report this, essentially, like turn this into a bug report? What information are we supposed to give, and all that kind of stuff. And as quest lead, I sort of built up a backlog of stuff that, like, I've reported this hundreds of times at this point, but like these are such minor problems that have workarounds, and sometimes that workaround is just having a CSR come along and like unbreak the quest for them. And that was, as far as we were concerned in CSR, as in CS land, that was a problem. But given that by that point we were also really, I don't want to say we were low on, but the numbers were reduced in the number of folks that were in development. So it was difficult to kind of catch up on a lot of these things while still working on a lot of the stuff that we were working on at the time. And that's how I ended up getting the power to submit a lot of fixes. And so there was about a period of like 6 months or so where I put together somewhere close to about 400 or 500 bug fixes that were all pretty minor. None of these were something that was like, oh, everybody notices this, but they were, small things where people could get stuck on a quest if they did something really specific. Like there were specific steps that they had to do to get stuck, because most of the big things got fixed, so
It's good.
It was an interesting position.
It sounds like a never-ending job. All right. So Alan Davies. Yeah. Okay.
Yep, that's right.
So when Warhammer Online launched, it didn't have the most stable launch, unfortunately. I heard that during a fortress siege, guilds were able to crash a server on demand to restart the battle. So what kind of panic moments did you have, did the server team have after launch?
We had lots of panic moments. I don't know. I just remember one of the bugs that we were having a problem with was when just so many people get into a battle like that, like it's sending UDP packets like exponentially, trying to say where everybody was, and it was just overwhelming the servers, and they would like crash from so much. But yeah, it was some late nights there in the beginning, and it was hard to push. We were spending every single night to get this themed launch that they would bring in food for everyone, for weeks on end. And we're like, and then, we launched and they were like, things are crashing. So it was tough. It was definitely a tough road to go down.
I feel like I brought up some nightmares.
Yeah, Alan, I think you've forgotten. It wasn't weeks on end; it was months on end. We were doing 6-day work weeks for a couple of months, and it was like catered food, three meals a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Yeah, it was nuts.
You know where else you get 3 meals a day? Prison, and it's basically the same experience.
One of the code bug things that I remember we fixed. I forget how many months afterwards, but there was people would say that it felt like our UI was a little slow, like a little not. It had like a kind of a delay, or it didn't feel very reactive, I think was how they would describe it. And I forget who the programmer was that found it, but I don't believe it was one of the early veterans. I think it was a relatively new person who found something.
Scott.
What was it?
David Scott, I think, found it.
You know where I'm going, right? Like,
yeah,
it was
a big delay in the code.
Yeah, it was a delay built in from the days when Rob Denton, I guess he would be chief operating officer, I guess.
Vice president, yeah.
Vice president, yeah. He pretty much ran the company. Like Mark ran the business, Rob ran the company, but when Rob was early on, he made a MUD, and that's what the code for Dark Age of Camelot and later Warhammer was initially based on. And there was a delay to keep people from spamming the server built in, and that delay made it to Warhammer, and it was just it just took it out, and suddenly everything felt really great.
Do you remember what the internal name for the patch from that fix was referred to?
I don't.
That was the Jesus patch, because it was going to make everything better. It was going to fix problems that Camelot had for 10 years at that point. It was going to make Warhammer better. It was going to descend from the. I don't know that we actually ever told the players that we had found this thing.
There's another one that it was in there. I can't remember if this made a Warhammer or not, but I know for sure it was in Dark Age. There was a command called vid refresh. Do you remember this?
Mm-hmm.
And the community swore by it. They swore it, like, oh my gosh, vid refresh. It makes sure it clears your video memory and makes the game run so much better. And it was empty. It was a command with it would print text back to you saying, video card refreshed, but it literally did nothing.
It's like the gaslight command.
It was not intentional. It wasn't something we did to like fool people. It was did because I think it was started and never finished.
Sure.
And people found it and started using it, and yeah, it never was.
Developers are genius.
That's great.
Wow. Okay, so we have another question for Josh. Now, I don't mean to be mean, but so it says Karazak Karak 8 Peaks. Josh, in the Warhammer Online production podcast number 3 titled Tier RVR Explanation, you said to us that we would be able to fight and capture Karazak Karak. What happened?
Well, I think that's already been answered in some of the earlier responses from Mark and Mike and so forth. So jump in and provide any flavor you've got there. We made those production podcasts with what we were aspiring to deliver and what we expected to deliver. There was really, with limited exceptions, there was nothing that ever went in there that we weren't expecting to deliver. But we also made them over the course of multiple years. And so you'd often go back and look at earlier podcasts and so forth, and at the time, there wasn't any expectation that these things would like live forever. Like YouTube existed, but I remember at the time we were uploading them to the old like Google video. Like YouTube wasn't part of Google yet, and we were actually distributing the podcast through. It was like the file burst system we were using, which is crazy. All of them are still out there somewhere. Like
Right.
There's still a server that we don't have any control over, that EA doesn't own, and all that data is still on there. But the intention was that they would be kind of ephemeral, that we'd come out, we talk about, this is what we're thinking of doing, this is the aspirations we've got. It was supposed to kind of be like the beginning of a conversation. Over time, that starts to interact with reality. And, we were acquired by EA partway through development. And so in a lot of ways that was great, but in other ways it meant we're now we're not an independent company anymore. We're now part of a publicly traded enterprise, and a lot of what we say has to be much more carefully vetted and so forth. And you also then have obligations to get the game out inside of certain windows of time. And so a lot of the same pressures that resulted in a ton of hard work that went into things like those other capital cities not making it into the formal release, which is why I love to see that the community has kind of resurrected those with Return of Reckoning. I was more than a little happy when I saw that, because I know how much work had gone into it, and that it didn't get put aside callously or with indifference. It was necessity, and that's pretty much the answer for why didn't X get into the game. Why didn't we launch with Choppas? Why didn't we launch with Slayers? Because we needed to get the game out, and our intention was bring all that content in. We had long lists of plans to make sure that we make the experience whole for players, and that's sort of the promise of MMOs in general, is that this is not a fixed point in time where you deliver the product and it's done. That it can be an organic and ever-expanding thing, and the intention was, through free expansions, continue to add more and more content over time, and really kind of build it into the full promise. So that's my answer there. But by all means, folks who were more directly involved in those decisions, please correct or clarify.
Yeah, cool.
If nothing else, Warhammer Online had a lot of potential, and it was really sad because I was there until it shut down. It was really sad to see that go away. That like there was all that potential that we had, and I'm really happy to see that somebody has carried on at some point. So I think that's good to see. Agreed. At least. And so yeah. I'm very excited to see whatever you guys got.
I saw a video come out recently, and it was Keg's End, and I won't lie, I had a very warm feeling just take over. Like, oh my god, I miss Keg's End.
Great. So let me just go through. I've lost where I was.
What happened to Karazakarak was the last question.
Well, while you're
They're not in order.
Is there? Was anybody here super involved with like public quests? Like, did we or did we not invent that?
Yeah,
we
did. I think was that Destin as well, Mark? That had that idea.
Technically, that was me. Yeah.
Okay.
You knew
high
that.
five,
are
Mark.
you baiting me? I think you're baiting.
But he owes one to Destin, so we're all going to agree that Destin intended public quests to make it whole over the train depot.
Love you, Mark.
It's actually kind of a funny story how public quests happened, because it was early on in design, and we got some pretty brutal feedback from our president. And oh yeah, it was awful. Like it was pretty brutal how badly he did not like our design. And we had this like emergency meeting with the design team, and we were all in that conference room, actually technically over by the president's office, and we sat around in a big circle brainstorming ideas that we could somehow differentiate ourselves. And I didn't say anything the entire meeting, which is, you guys know me, it's pretty unusual. But I had this phrase in my head that was I was kept thinking, and it was like, quests that come to you, quests that come to you. And I walked out of the room, walked into Doug's office, and Doug was sitting at his desk. Chris Lynch was literally laying in the floor, his head against the wall. And I said, hey, Doug, I got an idea. And I started drawing what would later become the chapter 2 dwarf. Was it dwarf or greenskin? I forget which one, but it was the one near the dam where there was a forest and there were dryads, and you end up fighting a big dryad at the end. If you remember that one, I want to say it's chapter 2 or chapter 3. That I started drawing trees in a forest, and I said, what if when you walked in this forest there were dryads there, and there was like, you have to kill 10 of them. And Chris was like, oh, okay, yeah. What if when you kill those, like a boss would come out? And then we started drawing that. And then Doug was like, yeah. And what if there was like a reward system that we could add on, so that, you'd want to do these things over and over again in the entire area? And then like, it was just piece by piece, we turned it into the public quest system, which was funny too, because we had a term already in Warhammer called public quest. If you remember, it was, or any of the early designers, Mike, do you remember how we actually had public quest? That was to code. but it was for encounters. It wasn't anything related to what would eventually become.
Yeah.
So we tried, the designers, I was on the design team, so we thought we were being clever. Alan, I'm so sorry for what I'm about to say. We thought we were going to like trick the programmers into thinking we weren't actually adding scope by giving it a name that was similar to something else we were doing. So we, instead of calling it like something new, like the event system, we decided to call it Advanced Public Quests, because we're not asking for a new system. We're just asking for something that's a slight iteration on the thing. And it was
Nice.
unrelated completely. And we needn't have bothered because the programmers immediately loved it. Like everyone
Yeah.
liked the ideas when we started pitching it. Yeah.
Can I just tell you that as somebody who came in after all of that, having to learn the difference between PQ and APQ was really frustrating.
Kevin, I tried to get that out of the document. I remember so many times reading those documents and saying, take out the word advanced, please. That it's no longer relevant. Like wait, but we had a template. We had a document writing template, and they were always, the template was APQ. It's like we couldn't get rid of it at that point. It was ingrained.
I just remember like
was,
oh, go ahead.
Even worse was we had very little access to a lot of the documentation as CSRs, and especially like coming from the quest side of things, of having to like, why is this broken? And all I've got are like show commands in the game. So, I've got very little to work on here. We barely even had access to like the what was it called? Felix or Oscar or any of those tools.
Oh man, yeah.
Didn't even have access to any of those things. And we're sitting there like, how do we figure this out? Like all we can do is in-game run commands. And so we're looking at this stuff and trying to figure this out. And then when you would see APQ and you'd be like, oh, wait, what does that mean? Is that different? Whole thing was just world blown open. Like, oh god.
But like as a player, that was I'm very, very happy that we did that. Because one of the things we had an early, I don't remember if it was an E3 demo or we had or like from like the previous year, but it was like a dwarf starting area where there was like a goblin camp and you had like a wall and you had to go out and do the stuff. And there was a guy that would spawn at the fire, and there was just a line of people that was like had to kill the guy. And I'm like, why? Look, I'm here when it happened. Why do I even need to contribute damage? Like, just give me credit and make the guy run away. We drove him away, and then like, why does he need to die and stuff? And so like I'm not, that's just a stupid anecdote. I didn't do anything about the system. But I remember being really loud about that. Like, can we find something? So great job on making it be awesome for that whole thing. Like that was.
And I think another thing is that it wasn't entirely that it was a brand new system that nobody had ever done anything even similar to, but because like we had the encounter system in Dark Age of Camelot, which was very, very similar to the public quest, but it was missing a lot of the key parts or the key features that really make public quests good, and like really the innovative part that they eventually became, which was stuff like the UI, how the UI handles the different stages of the public quest, how we handle the reward within that system and all that kind of stuff. And that's where we could like really, I say we, you guys, because I like Kevin, I was there kind of on the tail end of things, where we really kind of took things to the next level and so really made it something very, very interesting, not only for players, but also for other developers as well, because I see a lot of other folks trying to copy the public quest system, and some of them not quite there.
Kevin made a ton of our public quests. Like you made so many really cool ones in Empire and Chaos. I remember many.
Hey, thanks.
Yeah, there were so many good ones in there. I was just thinking about the Witch Hunter one you did, where
I was just thinking about that too. Oh, get out of my head.
I love that public quest. That was so good.
Getting the player put onto that pyre was probably the most frustrating thing because of the varying heights of our races, and that was a lot of fun.
Do I have sound again?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh yeah, okay, sweet. No, I was gonna with the APQ thing, Calvert. Do you remember when we were trying to hypothesize what the hell APQ stood for, and one of us was like, "Oh, maybe that means alternate public quest," and there's like a sub step of things you have to do. Is we would get so philosophical trying to figure out what the hell that meant.
Meanwhile, we could have just walked upstairs and asked, right?
Well,
So-
on graveyard shift, not so much.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, not only graveyard shift, but also one of the things that ended up happening, unfortunately, I think, well, I can't say unfortunately, it's just for better or worse. The company became very much siloed around that time, so customer service really kind of kept the customer service, and we sort of had to drive things up the ladder, because we were just, it's like, don't bug the developers, don't try to,
Keaven, I want to jump in real quick. You're totally right, and it wasn't. I think it happened way sooner than what you're saying. I remember there was one. It's one guy's fault. And which is terrible to lay all this on one person. But Jeremy, yeah, it was all your fault. No, there was a guy. We were all about having customer service supplied a lot of our developers. Like a lot of people came from, myself included, elevated through there. So of course we liked the idea that Mike, you and I both came out of it at the same time. We really wanted to champion it, that everyone talks to everyone. And then we had this CSR that we hired who was downright awful, was being basically abusive to developers and like demanding things. And it was just like, okay, fine, this is not going to work. And so we put these rules in that customer service couldn't come up and talk to developers. They were distracting them, and it was all because of one silly person. I don't know why we had to react quite that way, but it took us a long time to work backwards from that.
Mm-hmm.
There was a time later when we were all on, not everybody, but where a good chunk of people were down on 2. Was that
2?
Yeah. A big chunk of we split development and brought a bunch of people down to 2. And I remember being down there. We were right outside of the CSR pit. So that was really the first time that I had a chance to very easily just walk in there and talk with CSRs. They could come out and talk to us, and I think that was a breaking down of that wall at that time, which was nice to finally have, because that kind of prohibition of not being allowed to go downstairs to talk to CSRs never really made sense to me. Like, well, why can't I talk to people? I don't understand. If there's a problem, it'll be a lot easier and faster if I go down there and talk to them about it. But
I must have been a rule breaker, because I would just go down there and start talking to them.
I would too.
Oh, yeah.
I just ignored
certainly
that.
there were a lot of people.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that as a CSR, and I was not a developer, I didn't have a background in that at all, but one of the things you always hear about working at a game studio is there's always the devs and then there's customer service, and you're the bottom of the totem pole if you're customer service. But even when the siloing happened, in my entire time with Mythic, there was never a time where if I walked past somebody in the hallway, or if I overheard a conversation, or if someone came into the CS room, we were still a family. And that's one of the things that has resonated for me all these years later. Is I'm still friends with so many people that I met there. And even back in that time, when I was on a smoke break or I was in the kitchen and I heard someone having a conversation, I never felt like, oh my God, if I open my mouth, I'm going to get fired. It was always such a welcoming and open door environment. And that's one of the things that I remember to this day so fondly.
Yeah, I agree. There was a lot of things done early on in the company to keep promoting that. Do you guys remember Wednesdays? You remember Wednesdays, right? Donut days, right? Like
Yep.
every Wednesday.
Right.
It's not Thursday.
That was
It's not Thursday. It's one day post donuts. It's 2 days post donuts.
Yep.
And we always had the really great, holiday parties at the end of the year. For the longest time, Mythic would pay for all of us, the entire freaking studio, to go to E3. How many hundreds of thousands of dollars was that, right? That was a lot of money to send the entire company and they didn't have to do that. They sent everybody, including customer service. I was that was my first trip to E3 was as a customer service rep, and being blown away that the company would give me that opportunity and pay for everything. It was wonderful.
And they technically had us all work. We were all given like one 45-minute shift in the booth to stand next to Sonya and like be a bodyguard and clean off a mouse, and then they're like, "All right, you're free to go now." So,
Sure.
Don't get in trouble in LA.
Josh, I need to find that video that you and I made that first, because we went together that very first E3. I have you on VHS somewhere. You and I walking around E3 together.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
VHS.
Yeah.
I remember how fancy the launch party was. That was amazing.
So, what happened at the launch party? Tell us about that.
Well, what happened at the launch party stays at the launch party.
Yeah. Moving on. Next question.
Yeah, we had you already saw them. It was a little blinking cube.
Yeah. And the Steins.
It was a
downtown
lovely thing.
too.
Yeah, everybody got dressed up, and they picked us up at the office in big buses and drove us to the venue.
right.
And open bar, weird cover band. Like I remember the musical choices was peculiar.
Definitely.
Yes.
I remember there were a lot of talks about getting different bands, like big names, and there were even some MCs that we were trying to get. Like at one point, I think we were trying to get Shatner to come out and be our MC. And
Oh my gosh.
God.
yeah, I remember sitting in Hickman's office, him and Paul, maybe you, Josh, were all in there, like brainstorming people that we could bring out. You know what? In some ways, what was more fun than the Warhammer launch party was great. I have a lot of great memories, but it's mostly a blur after like about my fourth or fifth drink.
Right.
But, do you remember the rock band party that we did?
Yes.
Oh.
The age of rocketing.
Age
Wow.
of Rocking. Yeah.
That was awesome.
There's some. I've got a lot of pictures of people
Wow.
dressed up in the full '80s, rock band style.
You still have that?
I have
I'd
some
love to see
photos.
those.
Yeah, there's some good
I think
ones.
I had like a blonde wig or something going on. But
Nice.
yeah, the studio had this. I can't remember. Was it on 3? It had like a game room, and there was always Cutler, myself, and I think Ari. We'd always just jam at Rock Band like at lunch every day.
Nice.
Yeah, good times.
I think that was on 8 because on our
Was
lunch
it 8?
breaks,
Yeah.
on our lunch breaks, we would be like, "We're gonna sneak up to the dev floor and we're gonna go play Rock Band."
Right.
It was one of those up there.
So
I remember they built out a soundproof room for that.
Yeah.
Impressive.
It was not
posted,
soundproof
23
Oh,
23 low-res seconds of the launch party is in the chat if you want to relive a bright red evening of your life.
Wow.
I still have pictures of myself dancing, and I don't remember because I definitely was on my 5th or 6th cocktail at that point.
Yeah.
Oh.
I thought we said we were going to keep this like.
Well, what's amusing is you can see really the only thing you can make out is all the glowing ice cubes everywhere. You can see these little points. I think when it first pans by, that's Andres like just looking at an ice cube in the palm of his hand.
I don't remember if I was there. Like, was I out of town or something? I don't remember what.
We had parties all the time and didn't tell you.
Nice. That's fair. To be fair, per Josh saying that they didn't tell me, it's because that I would have been, obviously, it would have been fine if I went. I just always needed an invitation because I'm broken that way. And so they're like, "Oh, you guys got together again without me. Like, will you just come over?" And like,
there literally was like we were all given these giant golden tickets for the launch party.
Yeah.
And like they're like, "You better have your ticket." I'm like, everybody knows everybody. We're not gonna like nobody's sneaking into the launch party.
Oh, I wish I still had
It was
mine.
cool. It's just cool to have it.
I might.
Yeah, mine got lost many moves ago.
Now watch, Josh is going off into his. Hey, folks! In case you're ever in the Austin area, Josh runs a Warhammer Dark Age of Camelot Mythic Museum.
I was gonna say,
That's probably true.
He's like Carrot Top. He's got a luggage full of everything. Props.
I found the Imperial.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh wow.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so I'm gonna see if I can find. So this is all CJ's art, I think. Yeah, so you can see some of like CJ Greb's, original concept art in here.
Oh wow.
So these would have been the Furies. I'm going to see if I can find. Yeah, so the original heavy armors were all supposed to have helmets and stuff like that, and those all had to go away. Yeah, this folds out. Wow. Man, this is nicer than I remember it being. Guys, we should have stolen more of our own swag.
Yeah.
Wow,
Wow.
that is nice.
Yeah. I should look at this stuff. Sorry,
Cool.
done. Oh, sorry.
So I'll go on to another question. This is kind of for anyone and everyone. So according to a news article, which I can't find at the moment, at E3 2006, people who got their hands on Warhammer Online to play were playing with developers who were back at Mythic HQ, playing on Xbox 360 games consoles. Was this just a tech demo? Would there have been an Xbox 360 release? Did any of you play the Xbox 360 version? Now, before anyone answers, I found these. Someone posted them on Twitter, which is
Not me, I promise.
or is coming to the
wow.
Xbox 360 with its new console user input.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
What year did you say that was? That was 2006?
It says 2007 in this document, but the article said 2006. And there are some screenshots of people playing on the Chaos 360 server.
Yeah.
Yeah. So has anyone had experience with the Xbox 360 version?
So all I remember is, so we had that in development. The only thing I remember was if you're assigned one of the dev kits, it was your first initial, last initial. Xbox was the name of your device. And I remember Chris Andres had one because we called his the Coxbox. Because it was CO Xbox was the name of Chris Andres's dev kit. So if you go back to that video and you find the guy staring at the gleaming cube in his palm, he was the wielder of the Coxbox at that time. I don't know that got particularly far, but it is a thing that we were looking into.
Yeah, I remember seeing a build on it, but as far as I can remember, it was just a prototype of. In theory, it could work on Xbox, but I don't think we really pushed in any given direction of taking it seriously at the time. It just, I think the PC version it was enough for all of us to handle at the time. To be honest, so
Sure.
Nice.
We resurrected it very briefly when we were investigating Wrath of Heroes development to see if there was anything that we could salvage from the Xbox architecture and use to help speed up Wrath of Heroes.
gotcha.
There's a lot of little things like that happen though, where another example of sort of a thing we were sort of exploring off to the side was just after Wrath of Heroes. We still hadn't actually stopped development on Wrath of Heroes, but somebody took Unity and started just throw stuff into Unity, a lot of the Wrath of Heroes stuff, and then they were like, here, I did this, and then I just clicked this button, and now I've got lighting in the entire scene. I didn't have to do any of that nonsense of lighting a scene. Like, look how much time I just saved. Can we just port it to Unity? And it was like, oh.
Nice.
There's a lot of little discoveries like that. Like, oh, this is cool. Didn't go anywhere though.
Fair enough. Right, we have a question for Keaven Freeman.
I didn't do it.
As you may have seen, at Return of Reckoning, we took your first installment of the Stronghold Saga live event and added 2 subsequent live events. Can you tell us about your plans for Mythic's version of the Stronghold Saga?
Oh man. Yeah, sure. Okay. All right. When Keaven, Calvert, and I sat down and started brainstorming the Stronghold Saga, it always was intended to be the end of Warhammer. So it was our attempt to bring some kind of narrative closure to the story of Age of Reckoning in a way that made contextual sense, even if it didn't feel good. And we knew that it wasn't going to feel good. It was never going to feel good. But there have been so many MMOs that just ended. Like one day you're playing and the next day the server shut down. We didn't want that to happen. We wanted there to be closure. So we, not knowing exactly when the other shoe was going to fall, just being told that it had already been dropped and it could fall at any moment, right? That we developed a series of events, and it was going to lead players through to the orc-occupied dwarf city and culminate in a battle where one of two things would happen. If Order won, that was going to be represented as Grumlock and Gazbad being killed. And if they died, and that led to the dwarf city being retaken by the dwarves, we now have eliminated the reason for the dwarves being part of Order, and we have eliminated the kind of the nucleus around which the greenskin formed for destruction. And that was kind of our narrative cascade moment to explain how everything else falls apart. Without the dwarves part of Order would eventually fall apart, and without the greenskins, the destruction would eventually just kind of self-destruct. So that was our rationale behind having this saga, and it also gave us an excuse to throw in a capital city there at the end to hopefully delight people, so that even with it being a sad send-off, it would kind of be, it would be an experience to remember and an experience to bring closure to the whole story in some capacity.
Was there anything that we did that they co-opted into the destruction of the old world for Warhammer? I wonder. Like, was there any storylines that we started that GW ran with?
Not particularly. Not really.
Keaven. I want to say Kevin's plural. Kevin's. That was beautiful. I love that. I love that you did that. And the way you said it, I couldn't tell for sure if it happened or not. Like, it sounded like you planned it, but did it happen?
No. We got through the first of 4. There were 4 planned installments
stages
through the Stronghold saga. Yeah, and we only got through the first one. We didn't even get all the way through the first one before the event was still running when everything was the rug pulled out.
Sounds so beautiful.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, beautiful in a very Warhammer kind of way.
We were also going to introduce in stage 3, in stage 3 of the multi-stage event, we were going to release legendary weapons, and legendary weapons in the sense of, so way back in the day with MUDs, in some versions of MUDs, you could, if you found the temple of a god, you could pray for a weapon, and that god's weapon would be given to you. And there was only one. So if somebody else happened to have been wielding it at the time, the god finds you worthy, takes it away from whatever person had it currently, and gives it to you instead. This was the idea behind our legendary weapons that we were going to have in stage 3. There were only going to be one set of these weapons, and only one person across across the server would be able to get it and be able to use it, which led to a lot of hurdles to jump over, to rationalize being able to do that, and to persuade production to let us do that. But also, it was like, at the end of the day, it's the end of Warhammer, so like there were a lot of things that we would not have been able to do at the beginning that we got away with at the end because people kind of stopped caring.
Although we still had to submit a lot of our stuff to, what was his name, like John Lancaster or something like that.
Oh, John, yeah.
Was it? Can't
Yeah.
can't remember if that's his name, but we had to submit all of our stuff to a guy in GW, and then he had to be like, yes, this is allowed or not.
Yeah.
And he was still very much like on a lot of our stuff, like but if we rationalized it, and that was the thing, was like just trying to come up with the rationale. And I think that's where a lot of my expertise came in, was because I go into depth about like how this totally fits Warhammer War, and we would get away with a few things. But most of this was just really actually Kevin's doing, because he was coming up with all this stuff, and I'm like just taking notes on the side, like, yeah, this is great, I love it.
Nice.
Was just leading the whole thing.
Was it Gillen? John Gillen?
Yes.
I don't remember.
Eric Mogensen.
Yes.
Eric
Yeah.
Yeah, Eric.
Yeah.
Eric
He's good.
Mogensen, who used to like to confuse me by telling me to rename abilities because in British slang it meant something, and then I years later found out he'd made it all up.
Oh,
And so he's like,
funny.
you can't use follow through. That means diarrhea in England. I'm like, does it? That sounds crazy. And it was just, he'd just pick a thing and he'd mess with me and Gersh and like reject random things. Basically, it was like the old Van Halen M&M color thing. Like, just to see if you're paying attention, we're gonna give you some feedback about it. So it's a poo joke you're trying to sneak into this game.
Yeah,
Wow.
we snuck our own stuff in though too. Like Dark Age of Camelot is a place you can get to.
Oh, that's
in
right.
the, it's in the
I remember
Inevitable
that.
City.
Yep,
in
I've seen that. We did
Empire.
We let people go there. We let people go there for one of the live events where we had Paul Barnett telling you to kill bears in the Dark Age of Camelot area.
And then there's an area in I think it's Empire or Chaos Chapter 4, if I remember right. There's a ruined town that you can go into, and one of the Empire buildings has a sign that's called the Winchester, which is totally what's it called, the zombie apocalypse movie
Shaun
with
of the Dead.
Shaun of the
Shaun
Dead.
of the
Thank you.
Dead.
Yeah. And there's also Cetus, and one of the Cetus from Trials of Atlantis is in there. It's one of the Empire. What do we call them? Scenarios. We call them, the instance PvP. There's one where it's a winter area. There's an ice lake, and there's a horn sticking out through the ice.
Yeah.
And that is Cetus from Trials of Atlantis. Yeah,
Wow.
we snuck more than a few things in.
How
So
about
people
the
refer to that.
That was rad.
People refer to that as the lag monster, because if you're near it, it's so big under the ice, but you only see the tip. You kind of get some lag from it.
Oh no.
So you should have cut off its nose, stuck its nose through there.
What kind of an Easter egg would that be?
my favorite thing that we got, that somebody, and I don't say this facetiously, I mean somebody, I don't know who put this in. All I remember is that I got the bug for it. It was at the Tempest Horn PQ, and when you won, whoever actually, like, you remember we were talking earlier how everybody gets takes part in rolling on the rewards and gets rewarded for participation in the PQ. But with the Tempest Horn, the person who actually blew the Tempest Horn gets a t-shirt. And when you hover over the t-shirt, the description says, "I blew the Tempest Horn and all I got was this lousy t-shirt." And I thought that was hilarious. I don't know who put that in, but it was bugged. This was after we went live. It was bugged, and we were told to take it out. But we were told to take it out because it wasn't in the documentation. And so, Mark, I think it was you who kind of slyly said to me, "It's not in the documentation, Kevin."
Wink, wink, wink.
Wink, wink. Exactly. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll just put it in the documentation. Boom, problem solved.
Problem solved.
Right. Should we move on to one last question?
Sure.
Should we wait for Josh to get back? There he is.
Before we go there, Josh and Mark, if you remember, Danielle just brought this to me. My car, I had.
Oh,
yes.
Oh,
I remember having this on, the dork that I was, but I loved Altdorf, and I were driving down 66 one day after lunch, and someone's beeping at me. I'm like, what the hell's your problem? And then he comes to the side of me, rolls his window down, just yells, "Wog!" It's like all worth it. Like, this is
That's
awesome.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Nice. That's awesome.
So, one last question. So this is aimed
Hang on,
at
I have one more Easter egg thing.
one more Easter egg.
Let's
See it.
So this is
All right, let's see it.
a combo Mark and Jeremy Easter egg. So I had a friend for many years. He was a big Warhammer fan. He was a huge Keaven fan, and he wound up with cancer and was definitely not going to make it through development and passed away before we could get to the beta. And the last conversation we had, he was asking me all sorts of questions about, will there be playable Keaven in the game? And I was like, I don't know, man. It's not looking like. He's like, you got to make it happen. I was like, I don't know if that's going to happen. So I went to Mark one afternoon and asked him, hey, man, could you name one of the Keaven NPCs after my buddy? So if you've ever seen the Keaven NPC Vork, Vorque, that's Mr. Davis's kindness to my friend. After his mom found out about that and he passed away, she had gone through a bunch of his belongings and found some unpainted Keaven minis. He had actually painted one, so I'll hold this. Where is my camera? So this is one of his painted minis. It was unfinished and so forth, but I knew the colors that he had chosen. And I suck at art, but Jeremy does not. And so I gave Jeremy the minis and asked him if he'd be willing to paint them for me. Not only that, but he actually built this entire diorama, and he matched the color scheme that Wark had chosen. And so, you know, I sent this to his family so they could see what had happened, sent them some footage of the game and so forth. I still talk to his mom regularly and so forth. So that's my Easter egg. These two guys were a huge part of helping to make a really terrible situation a little bit better for people that they've never met. You brought some joy to those folks at a really sad time, and
that's wonderful.
So there you go. That's my feel-good Warhammer Easter egg, and Vork lives on because of you guys. So,
And I think
that's
that's
wonderful.
That's the most best little story to end on. Best Easter egg. And amazing story. Keaven Calvert, you were one of the only handful of people that were left when Warhammer actually shut down. Before you moved with the Dark Age of Camelot and Ultimate Teams to Broadsword, can you walk us through the feel Mythic had in the office on the day of shutdown? All the players have experienced it from in-game. You know, what was it like from the inside?
It was really tough, actually. There was a bit of like nobody really wanted to just kind of break down on it and just be like, yeah, okay, this is happening. So there was a lot of like celebrate the good and celebrate the fun that we had and all that kind of stuff. So I think it was like the day before the actual shutdown. I can't remember if it was the day before or if like shutdown was happening late enough that we had started early in the morning. But we had a bunch of folks just start logging in as on our CSR or our gems or whatever, our GM, what have yous, and we started just doing stuff. Like we would spawn in crazy amounts of monsters. We would, give people stuff to just like have some fun basically. And a lot of it was just, how do we sort of mess with this and just do things a little bit, just to remember all the good things that we had in the game. And there was definitely a moment from my perspective at least where myself and a few other folks, I think James Casey was still there, I don't remember, but that's who I think it was who was with me. But there's a couple of us that we went off into one of the parts of Chaos Waste, and we just started spawning like every single monster that we could think of, that we were just like, oh, this is cool. Oh, do you remember this one? And then like we'd spawn it like, oh, that was Demon Prince that so and so made or whatever. And it was fun to do, and it was really like, it was a moment of like, should we be like capturing this for posterity's sake? So like there was a lot of screenshots that were taken. There were a lot of just like we're so sad to see this go, and we really don't want to have to do this, but like it's not in our control anymore.
So how did everyone else find out about the shutdown? As in, like, these guys here. Did you?
Oh, I was on complete other side of the country. I was in Seattle, and it was sad for me to know that the place where I got started. I spent my first 10 years. I had never planned to leave Mythic. It was never like if you look. I mean, I think if you'd asked me if I thought I'd ever move on, I would have probably said yes. But I bled Mythic. I loved that company. It's a whole long story about why I left, but so when I heard the shutdown, it was a really sad day for me. I texted a lot of my friends who were both there. I think Keaven, I think I was probably texting you that day, and also maybe a little secretly also hopeful that I could finally convince Keaven to come join me at ArenaNet. But one thing I wanted to say I've been at studios. I wasn't at Mythic when they shut down, but I have been at studios when they do, and it's really hard to walk in a hallway where you used to be so full of life and energy and creativity. It's actually giving me chills right now thinking about it. It's hard because when you walk around those quiet hallways and all those moments are coming by, it feels so, I don't know, empty and sad because of all the creativity that lived in those hallways and all the buzz that used to be there. And it's it's hard even now to even talk about it all these years later.
I think for me, Paul had called me a couple days before I think Carrie made the announcement, to basically say like, hey, I think it was the 5-year anniversary. Like we wanted to get to the 5-year anniversary of the launch and then announce the sunset. So I'd known for a couple of days that it was coming, but it's still a pretty tight community invisibly. Like there are Facebook groups and LinkedIn groups and so forth. So it's unusual for me to go more than a couple of days without talking to somebody from Mythic. I'm actually getting together tomorrow with Paul and Hickman. Paul's going to be in town to go to a magic convention, and he's going to.
Wow.
We're going to grab dinner or something.
Nice.
But
like card games or prestidigitation.
The second one. I'm not going to try and say that out loud. But yeah, Mark and Mike and I, we joined very close together just prior to the launch of Dark Age of Camelot, and like Mark, it had not really ever occurred to me to leave. I would not have left Mythic until the last light turned out. If it had been my decision, because we cared about the team, we cared about the players, we cared about the work we were doing, and it felt like there was still work left to do. Keaven's story a minute ago, I had never heard that before, and as Mark was saying, that's a beautiful act of creative energy that a less committed team or a more cynical group of people wouldn't have been thinking about pouring that kind of love into something that's not only going to end, but it's going to end, and because of the sort of ephemeral nature of MMOs, it's going to go away forever unless miraculous little wizards out on the internet bring it back. So thumbs up for that. It would be awesome to see now that we know the master plan. To see that maybe spin up in some capacity would be great. But yeah, it was weird to hear it. It was very sad, and it still is. But
yeah, I just think, kind of like you and Mark saying, there's just so many good memories that come out of it that I just, to this day, I tell people that my current place of employment, just kind of some of the stories that came out of it. I mean, to this day, just talking about instances within instances and the technology back then and how much of a nightmare that was, it kind of comes up to this day. And it's just, I was cut from Mythic, like my production chops, design, I was in art, and there was just so much that I've done over the 9 years there that it just it's just made me a better person in the industry for where I am now. So I'm just forever grateful for it.
I was in a different office. Like I had been hired by Carbine at that time, so I was in California sitting in my office at Carbine. As a matter of fact, Sean Bossart to my left, and Chris Lynch right behind me, and we're all watching a Twitch stream of somebody playing, and we knew that this was the end, and that's why we were all kind of gathered around watching. And I'm not at all ashamed to say I was crying like a baby. And when that final log came up on the screen from whoever it was that did the server message, and then everything went to black and white, it was incredibly emotional.
Yeah.
Can you hear me again?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know why it just seems to hate my mic settings, but no, what I was going to say is that I took a huge chance to join Mythic. I was living in Maryland, working at a job that I absolutely did not like at all, and I found the posting and I was blown away that I was ever given the chance to be a CSR. Gaming has been my life, my entire life, but unfortunately, I got a D in my C++ class. I didn't have coding skills. All I had was writing. So my CSR position was kind of my hope. Maybe they'll take a chance on me, and they did. And over the 4.5 years that I worked at Mythic, I had so many investments given to me, opportunities to grow. Unfortunately, I didn't get to continue working in the industry. Mythic was my only foray. And, you know, I always tell people if I could go back and have one day in that studio again, I would. Never in my life did I imagine that I would be given the opportunity to work on such an amazing game, meet some amazing people. I mean, I'm still friends with so many people to this day. Even after Warhammer shut down, I stayed in the area, and many of us kind of kept the feeling alive by regularly doing karaoke nights at the old Shebeen, having parties, getting together. It was a time like none other in my life. And like everyone's kind of said, that the end of it was, you knew it was coming. In the CS room, we were let go before the final shutdown, but in the time going up to it, we did the same thing. We helped everyone with the same amount of passion and dedication. And we, at that point, there was like maybe 13 of us, I want to say. And I'll never forget the last night, we all went out to Texas de Brazil as a goodbye. It was a goodbye dinner for us. And, handing in my name badge, that was the moment. I never thought I would make it to the end, because we were CS. We didn't think we would be there. And the moment that I handed in my badge was when I lost it, and I started bawling like a baby, and it was a domino effect. And the last time I walked out of that building, for a long time, I couldn't drive by that building because of the whole thing about walking through those sad halls, even seeing the building. But all these years later, if you ask me if I would do it all over again, hell yes, WOG all the way. I would do it, hands down.
Cool. So thank you everyone for watching. It's been a pleasure to chat with all these amazing guys who worked at Mythic and on Warhammer Online. And maybe we can do something like this again one day. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Max.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's awesome. An amazing thing that you guys are doing, and if we haven't said it before, say it now. It's a real testament to the quality of the fan base and the dedication of the players and the impact that the game had, and can't thank you guys enough for what you're doing. So keep it up.